to the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center's Take Leadership Series. My name is Deidre Teagarden. I'm the Executive Director here at the NVMC, where our mission is to inspire people to find the hero within themselves through the legacy of our Nisei veterans. You can find out more information about the center on our website at nvmc.org. We are so happy to have all of you joining us today for this talk story with the former managing editor of the Maui News, Mr. Lee Imada. I will get to his bio in just a minute, but wanted to thank all of you for being here. And this is the last Take series for this year, so we're really glad that we can end it on such a high. Want to let you know that, as always, we accept questions throughout the event. So send in your questions in that little question and answer box at the bottom left of your screen. We'll get to as many as possible. And of course, we couldn't do this programming or any of the programming that we do here at the center if it weren't for the generous help of all of our supporters out there, as well as these corporate sponsors. So please help me thank all of these organizations. Now, without further ado, because we have lots of questions to ask Lee Imada, we want to get right to it. So it gives me really, it's lovely to introduce you, Lee. I want to talk a little bit about your background, though. So for the last 39 and a half years, Lee Imada has observed most of the major events in Maui County, from the Hannibal Tavares to the Michael Victorino administrations, 7 administrations in total, counting Mayor Alan Arakawa twice. And while not on the scene of most happenings like his colleague Matt Thayer, he has interacted with reporters in the field in real time and edited and designed their stories and photos into the pages of the Maui News. These include the turning over of Kaho'olawe by the Navy to the state, the Aloha 243 landing, an air ambulance plane crash in the parking lot of the Old Poi by the Pound, and the devastating fires in Lahaina. But the job has allowed him to also get up close and personal to a nesting u'au, or shearwater, in Haleakala Crater, visit a bog with green swords in a remote area of the park with Haleakala National Park Superintendent Don Reeser, fly to an aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, which had just been featured in the movie Top Gun, walk through W.S. Merwin's garden, and get within a few feet of the leading edge of the A'a lava flow at the Royal Garden subdivision. He has interviewed and written about astronauts Scott Carpenter, who flew in the Mercury Aurora 7, and Charles Duke, who landed on the moon in Apollo 16 and was the voice of mission control during the landing of Apollo 11. Tommy John before he had his surgery. Super Bowl winning coach Tom Flores of the then Los Angeles Raiders. G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate, and mayors, senators, governors, and school superintendents. All in all, he has had his hand in the coverage of 19 elections. So please help me welcome Mr. Lee Imada. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't remember all of those things, actually.
Well, that's because you're retired now.
Yeah. Yes. Right. That must be it.
So I want to start off with this really beautiful story that Colleen Uechi did on the front page of the Maui News. For those of you who didn't read it, you can go to the mauinews.com and find it. It was the December 5th and 6th edition. But I have to ask you, how does it feel being the subject of a front page story for a change?
It was a unique experience. I've rarely been on the other side of the coin, so to speak. I may have been like questioned for like a bit piece here or a quote here, but it's the first time that I've been featured in a article like that. And yes, it's different. It's difficult. It's difficult and it's different, but I guess I now understand how the people I asked questions of feel. Just like now, I feel it's the same way. I feel the same way now. And as I tell people, you know, I like to write. I communicate best through writing, not through speaking. And so again, it was a challenge for me to, in Colleen's case, she did an awesome job, and she's also succeeded me at the Maui News, and I have high hopes for her to continue the legacy of the Maui News.
Great. Well, she's on the call today, and it was a beautiful article. Kudos to her, and to you for everything you've done all nearly 40 years at the Maui News. But let's talk about you a little bit. Some things that people might not know about you. Your father was a Korean War veteran, and then
Yes.
he came back. He was the director of the Department of Water Supply for
Yes.
some time, and your mother was a teacher.
Uh-huh.
So both of them very public service oriented professions. How did that impact you?
Um, it, you know, it's only until recently that I began to realize how much of what they taught me just sort of through osmosis became a part of my life. And I should also say that I have a brother and a sister, and my brother became a teacher. My sister is in the tech side, Karen, and she works at UH Maui College in the financial aid division, but she's got my dad's tech and engineering side. I think I got my mother's more the English, the humanities side. But my dad passed away about a year ago, and I've been thinking about his impact on me, and I've learned a lot of things from him. And a couple of examples, I remember him saying, I remember someone, I think a developer dropping off like a bottle of wine. And my dad never drank wine, so looked like a pretty expensive bottle of wine. He was like, oh no, I can't accept it. But the guy insisted. So he ended up taking it straight up to the corporation council to get an opinion on whether he could accept this or he needed to give it to someone else. And that struck a note with me. And it's something that I carry through in my coverage of public figures, because, they should be doing it for the public good and not for the personal good. And it's things like that taught me that, what to expect, or the standard, the goalpost that you put up for public figures, and how they should react and how they should conduct the business of the people. And through my mom, I probably got the my writing skills, my feeling about the empathy. And I think that's important for a writer or a reporter, is to have empathy, to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that's something that as a writer and reporter that I tried very hard to do, is to try to imagine what it was like to be, in the case of a atomic bomb victim in Hiroshima, moments after the attack, or the bombing, or the how it feels to have your home lost, if you lost all your possessions in a house fire. I tried to put myself in those people's shoes, ask questions to try to elicit how they're feeling, and try to let the public know, give them a glimpse of what that experience is like. And I'm citing negative things, but joy too, joy, humor, those types of things I've tried to elicit or bring out in my stories.
Your parents obviously were very value based, making sure to get that approval from corporation counsel before taking a gift. And I know we had spoken earlier about that whole Japanese concept of, making sure that you don't shame the family. So whether it's making sure that you can accept a gift or being empathetic, it's always about thinking about others. And your career, whether it's been those who came before you at the Maui News, or even in a story that you wrote about your grade school teacher, I think it was Mrs. Fukami, you talk about that obligation of, making sure that you do the best for those who came before you. And I think that sense of obligation runs very deep in you, and maybe even more so. And do you think that goes back to your parents as well?
Yeah, I remember Melissa Tanji wrote a story about Kirk Matsumoto's talk, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, but her lead mentioned how his grandmother told him, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're a ditch digger or the head of Lanai company, you have to do the best job that you possibly can so you don't shame the family. And it's interesting that I believe one of my grandmothers told me the exact same thing. And it, you know, those types of things stick with you. And you know, you do the best job that you possibly can, regardless of what it, you know, regardless of what you're doing. It, you know, I've helped with many of my kids' activities. You know, I tried to do whatever was necessary to make sure that the activity was a success. And yeah, and you know, I think oftentimes we think that life begins during our time, or when we're in the public eye, or when we're engaged in what we're doing and as a profession. But I think it's always good to put yourself in the continuum of where you sit in the continuum of things. And so in addition to gaining knowledge, the people in the past teach you where they've been and what they've done so that you don't make their mistakes. So that's one of the things that the people in the past, are my predecessors, such as Earl Tanaka, who's, I believe, with the 552nd. I understand he was a forward observer during World War II. And, you know, in some ways, I feel like I carried on his dream. He wanted to go to Northwestern University and become a journalist. Well, he became a journalist, became a very well, you know, he became managing editor, and he's one of the people that I succeeded. But I always thought that the fact that I went to Northwestern fulfilled a dream of his, one that he was not able to fulfill. And, you know, Dave Hoff, my immediate predecessor, you know, I was his right-hand person for a long time, you know, maybe 15, 20 years. And I learned a lot from him about how to manage a department, how to manage people, how to deal with difficult situations, and how to make decisions. And, you know, the thing is that we have to be humble, because not all decisions that we make are going to be right. And that, you know, I've made tons of mistakes, in some very embarrassing mistakes, things that you can't erase because they're published in the newspaper, and they'll be there forever as long as there's a copy of the Maui News lying around somewhere. So you need to be humble and learn from your mistakes. And those are some of the things that I learned from Dave. And I tried to, and when I took over, I felt like this wasn't day one. You know, I was picking up a torch. I looked at it like I was picking up a torch and trying to maintain the standards of the Maui News, make it better if I could. But at least maintain the standards. And I feel like I've done that to Colleen, and I feel like I'm handing her the torch, and I feel confident that she'll be able to carry on the great traditions of the Maui News.
Very nice. You know, when you said yes to this interview, I reached out to some people for guidance, including Roy Tanaka and Leonard Oka, and some other individuals, and they all had lovely stories about you. But whenever they spoke about your work ethic, they had talked about the fairness in which you covered stories, the unbiased in which you had when you covered stories. And I'm wondering, you know, as we talk today about fake news and media bias, do you feel like that fairness in journalism has somehow eluded us?
You know, like I say, I've been in this business a long time. And when I started, if you had like these TV talk shows, like you could do Rachel Maddow or you know, on the right, you know, Laura Ingraham or whatever. In my day, journalists never did that, you know, because I feel like if you put your own personal views out there, it just gives another reason for opponents who believe that you're not doing your job objectively, another target for them to shoot at. So I try to keep my own personal views. I mean, while we try to be objective and we report in an objective fashion at the Maui News, we all have our own personal views, you know. But the thing about the processes that we use at the Maui News and traditional news media is we have a process that tries to maintain fairness. For example, we try to get all sides, of a story. And if we don't get all sides in the story, we may not print that story. If we're unable to get, say, especially somebody who might not come out looking too good in a story, if we can't get that person, we may not run that story if it's making them look that bad. And I'm also I've also been very cognizant of the fact that once you put a person's name out there, that person, let's say that person was charged with a crime, murder, let's say, and they were later vindicated, and it's found out maybe through DNA evidence that they were not the perpetrator or the murderer. You can't take that back. There's always going to be some people out there who didn't get the news that this person was released. It's a mark on that person for maybe the rest of their lives. So I was always cognizant of that fact, the power that the press has in revealing names. And today I feel like there's too much opinion and not enough objective journalism, so that people can make, all we're trying to do is present the facts, as best a story. We present it objectively, as fairly as we can with the facts. And it's up to the readers to decide what they want to do with that information. We're not telling them to do anything. It's there for them to decide. If they believe that somebody who has done malfeasance deserves to be an elected official still, then that's their prerogative. And, that has happened. So, but all we do is we present, as journalists, we try to present the information in a fair way. And I think in today's atmosphere, I can see why the public feels that there's fake news, because there's so much opinionated journalism, which, I'm not a big fan of. And I would prefer more objective, fair reporting of the situation, of issues of importance to the community and, to the nation.
And journalists actually have a proper code of ethics that they are supposed to follow, correct?
Yes, the Society of Professional Journalists have a code of ethics that, it goes as far as, I know some journalists who don't vote because they feel, I'm not one of them. I feel like it's a secret thing, and I feel like voting is a part of my role as a citizen. But there are some journalists that feel that voting, and I know some who don't vote because they feel like voting is tainting their objectivity or a sign of favoritism for one side or another. So, there is that. And, we have other things, other rules, like, do we use sources with names, or when do we use unnamed sources, and what kind of criteria do we determine when we use an unnamed source? If a person puts a name to a comment, that's great, right? Because then they're showing responsibility. But there are times when individuals will be hurt if they disclose information, but that information is of great public importance. And so it's for the journalists to decide whether that's credible information or not credible, or whether the person has an axe to grind or not. So sometimes that involves getting 2 or 3 sources with the same bit of information. But we also, so we have rules about how we handle those things, for example. So yeah, there are rules that I feel are in place that we apply, that try to curtail, a personal bias or to maintain objectivity.
Right. So we had talked earlier, prior to this call, about the divisiveness in our society in general, and does media play some sort of role in that, and maybe it goes back to these pundits who put their own spin on whatever side it is. But do you feel like media does contribute to this divisiveness that we see?
Yeah, I think it does. Not like the objective, renowned newspapers or news organizations like the New York Times or the Washington Post or even the Wall Street Journal. But yeah, when you have opinionated talk hosts, all they do is they talk to their people, and the other guys talk to their people. But there never is a meeting of the minds. There's no talking between both sides. And despite the idea that there should be no compromise on lawmaking or bills from the local level all the way to Congress. Our governments are set up based on compromise. I mean, the founding fathers set up our country based on, excuse me, based on, sorry about that.
You know what? That's a very appropriate ringtone.
Yes, it reflects my, what do you call it, Star Trek bias. But yeah, forget what I was talking about. But yeah, so nobody talks. We should compromise. That's how we get things done. And I feel like this separation where we, one side talks up here and another side talks up here, and they never have a meeting of the minds. It increases the dichotomy or the separation, and we get nothing done. Right. And the main thing that I really hate about all of this is the demonization of people. The idea, and I know this is a political tactic where you take somebody and you make them like look like a demon or look so bad that you hate them and they're bad people, and that's how you mobilize large numbers of people to your side. But I've seen it done on the local level too, and I just think that these are I know them, and I don't put this in my news reporting, but I know most of the people that in government that I've talked to are good people. I mean, you may have differences in issues and opinions, and that's how our democracy works, but they're not bad people. And I wish that we would get rid of this demonization and just talk about the issues. And forget about demonization. If your issue is good enough and you defend it properly, then you should win. So it's a competition of ideas. That's what democracy is. It's a competition of ideas. And if your ideas are better and you argue them better, then you should prevail. And that's sort of my view on that. I wish we would talk more. I wish there would be more interaction.
Right. Well, I think that leads us to the whole idea of social media. And I know we were going to talk about that. And Thomas Kurihara just wrote in asking, how is print media affected by the competition with the immediateness of social media, compared to that of print media? Can fairness be a focus to gain attention, correct or otherwise? But basically, what is this? How is social media now affecting the journalism media?
Social media has its good and bad parts. The good parts is, as a journalist, I use it a lot. We use it a lot because that's how we often get tips on stories, or major stories are happening. Often they're initially reported by people who see it, in their cars passing by some accident or some, they'll say something happened at the hospital or something, or that's how we initially get our tips. But so in that sense, as a news gathering type or device, it's very effective. I would caution though that people who use it as their sole source of information, facts, that the accuracy on that is not necessarily that good. They don't bat 100% for sure. I'm not even sure they bat 50%. And some of the things that I see are like, they end up being totally wrong. And it's kind of like reporting. Like sometimes I'll get and this is something that I've learned through the years. I get a tip that sounds something that's really bad. And so I'll go and I'll investigate it. And in the end, there might have been something that was not very good about it, but it's not as bad as it was initially reported. And that's sort of what happens in social media, is you get the worst possible outcome when in fact it's something much less, or sometimes not even an occurrence,
And maybe it goes back to your idea of we need to be communicating more and not just living in our little bubble of,
right.
I like this person, so I'm just going to follow everything that they say.
Right. And I'd also like to add, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No,
I'd also like to add that immediacy is great. I mean, we're in a society now where, something happens and I want to see it. I'm like that, it's like, I heard about it. Why isn't Hawaii News Now or the Maui News have it on their website? But, most legitimate news sources need to confirm that information. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time. But for the Maui News, we're, because we aren't really, we do some breaking news coverage, especially during elections or major disasters. We turn ourselves into a immediate, breaking news source of information. We try to focus on more in-depth coverage, provide the complete coverage of something, and it's sort of what we have to do because that's what we have. That's the medium that we use. So our stories tend to be longer, but they also provide a broader, more detailed explanation of an issue or situation. And we've been in the news a lot recently because there've been some talk about the owners of the paper having some reporting done or even page designing done elsewhere on the mainland. And so we've been sort of that's sort of come out. So we've been the Maui News has been the focus of people's comments and things, and it's been gratifying to hear the support that we do have. I mean, I'm sure there are people that dislike us. I mean, we've done stories that have not made people look very good or whatever, but it was gratifying to see that people have still support what we do. And it is our fault partly that we haven't portrayed ourselves or marketed ourselves to increase our circulation or to have more people go to our website, because the Maui News produces information that you'll not find anywhere else. I start with our sports coverage. If there is no Maui News, there is no coverage of MIL events or major coverage, daily coverage of MIL events. And we're the only ones that cover the council or our government I use the word we. The Maui News is the only organization that covers the council and the issues that come up there in depth. You're not going to find it anywhere else. So, right. Like I said, that's been gratifying to see the support that we have in the community.
That brings up a couple of questions. One is step back when you're talking about having the design done on the mainland or from corporate headquarters. We hear this rumor that, I don't know if it's a rumor, but we hear the statement that there are a few individuals or a few organizations that actually own all the newspapers across the United States. Can you confirm or deny that? And how does that affect a smaller town newspaper?
Yeah, it's been happening for most of my career. When I started, a lot of the newspapers were family owned or individually owned in their individual communities. Through my career, my 40 years, it's changed a lot. Gannett was the first to start a conglomerate or a group of newspapers. But it's since exploded, and yeah, there are many newspapers are owned by major corporations, and there are very few family-owned newspapers like they were. Like, for example, the Maui News was owned by the Cameron family for almost 100 years, and they ended up selling to a newspaper conglomerate, the Ogden newspaper chain, which is based in West Virginia, and they have like 40 something newspapers across the country. So yeah, there are fewer owners, but like in our situation, the big company doesn't get involved very much in the individual operations of the individual newspapers. And in their defense, they've actually helped, because we are part of a chain. They've helped us survive some of the economic turmoil and transitions that we've had to deal with in the past, especially with COVID-19. The power of the large corporation has helped us survive that. Whereas I've heard of many other newspapers that have gone under because they're smaller, they don't lack the resources to deal with the large loss of advertising, which is the main source of. But the main newspapers, the main national newspapers, so I guess I would say that yes, there are chains that own many newspapers, but they often leave autonomy to some, like in our chain, leave autonomy of coverage to the individual newspapers. there are, I've heard of TV stations, for example, that TV stations, I don't know so much about newspapers, but I've heard of a TV station group that they're forced to run certain stories. They're forced to run them by their conglomerate, their home office. So, that does happen.
Well, it's nice to know the other side of the story too, that it's helpful as well. Mark Matsunaga had written in earlier today saying that the Maui News proportionally has hired more local journalists than other newspapers in Hawaii. And how did you do that?
I have to say that when I started, we had many reporters from all around the country would come here because, first of all, our pay was quite good, and it was on par with some of the top newspapers across the country. So we had very many reporters who came from the main, seasoned reporters, very good reporters who could work anywhere, like Valerie Monson or Christy Wilson, or I'm just Mark Adams, or some of the ones that I can recall throughout my years, that they were just great reporters and they could work anywhere. In recent years, the Maui News pay structure, they haven't had a raise in over 10 years, longer than 10 years. And so the pay structure has gone down some. So I've experienced this trying to hire people. It's difficult because of the high cost of rent and the high cost of living for somebody to make a jump here to the Maui News. So part of it is driven by economics. Some of our most recent reporters are local, they have local ties. They may have a place to live for a while. And that's one of the reasons. But I also think that having local people like Dakota Grossman or Chris Ugidono or Melissa Tanji, who have grown up here, they have a different insight, and they can provide more context to stories and get a feel for what's important to people locally who've lived here. I mean, I grew up here too, so we can provide a certain context.
Right.
And in recent years, I've had to do more training. Like I mentioned, that we would bring the seasoned reporters in. Some of the reporters that are local, we've had to do some training, but one of the things I've always looked for is people with hard work, people with intelligence, and people willing to, to try different things and have, some talent or skill for writing or photography or videography. And with those basic skills, we managed to turn out and develop quite a few young reporters who have turned into top-notch reporters.
Definitely. Okay, I want to jump over now to kind of back to some work that you did. You took a sabbatical from the Maui News for a few years. You went to Japan. You studied at Nanzan University in Nagoya, and then you went down to Hiroshima to research your family. And just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, when I was in my mid-20s, so this is quite a long time ago, I actually took a 9-month sabbatical, and the company was very gracious about that. And Roy actually had to cover my beats when I was gone. So, I wanted to learn about my family history. I'm pure Japanese, and both of my parents, well, my father's side came from the Hiroshima area, my mother's side from the Fukuoka area. But I had also heard that my auntie was a survivor of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. So that also perked my interest somewhat too. So I wanted to learn the culture, wanted to learn the language, which is a very difficult language to learn. And you're very good at it, by the way. And I also had career goals. I mean, I was young and I was hoping to be a Asian correspondent for a major news organization. So I thought learning about Japan and how things were, I mean, I was going to be beneficial for my career as well. At that time, Japan's economy was booming. It was rivaling the United States in many ways. And yeah, it was a great experience. I learned about the culture. And I got to see my family's home. It was pretty brutal in the winter because we had to. I lived in the home, the 100-year-old. I stayed in the 100-year-old home of my grand uncle, I guess, and it was just shoji doors, and it was in the dead of winter, and it was as cold outside as it was inside, and it was freezing. So, but I did learn a lot about my culture. I learned a few things more about the history of my family. My cousin took me up to a graveyard, and I got to write down a few. I learned a little bit more about my family, and that actually set the foundation for my second trip to Japan. I got a grant from the Hiroshima Cultural Foundation, and I got to interview hibakusha, or the victims of the atomic bomb. It was part of a program that they were inviting journalists over to try to spread the word. And I attended the Hiroshima and Nagasaki memorial ceremonies that year, which is pretty solemn and and very memorable for me. And I got to interview all of these victims, and I feel like an obligation. You know, I feel like I have an obligation now to tell their stories to the world, just or to whoever will listen, so that they'll never be forgotten. That's one of their big thing, is they don't want to be forgotten, and to understand the devastation of nuclear weapons. I mean, there's a lot of, especially among Nisei veterans and veterans in general, World War II, you know, they believe the bomb saved them. They didn't have, you know, there was talk about invasion in Japan and casualties in the hundreds of thousands. So they feel like the bomb saved their life, and I can understand that perspective. But I also feel like you need to see what the damage, you know, the wrath of the decision that you made, and the lives that were lost, and the lives that forever changed because of those actions. And interestingly enough, one of my contacts from my Nanzan days and my Hiroshima grant days, I got contacted, maybe, was it last year, I think. The mayor of Hiroshima went to the Honolulu Mayor's Conference, what do you call it, the Conference of Mayors, I guess, U.S. Conference of Mayors, and was held in Waikiki. So she asked me if I wanted to come down and do a story. So I ended up going to Honolulu and had a short reunion with her. I didn't have much time to reunite with my friend from Nanzan, but I got to meet and interview the mayor of Hiroshima, and I wrote a story in the Maui News last year about it.
I remember that, and you know, those are such difficult stories to hear, and such difficult stories to write. You know, in the news article that Colleen did, she talked about some of your more memorable articles that you did in throughout your career. But I wanted to ask you, you know, along the lines of the veterans, you know, if there were any stories or interviews that you were a part of that made an impact on you as well.
Yeah, when I do any story about the 100th 442nd or any of the other units in World War II, Japanese Nisei veteran units, I am humble, and I often wonder, if I was in that same situation, whether I would be brave or whether I would be a coward, you know, whether I could continue running on amid all the fire, the bullets, or whether I would be a coward and just cower. I think that until you're there, you never know. But I just, it's more than admiration that I have for the Nisei veterans who fought during World War II, not only because there was discrimination against them, but because, you know, they were willing to put their lives on the line and for the job that they had to do, and for their fellow, you know, soldiers. And some of the things they did were just beyond heroic, you know. And I did a story when Barney Hajiro passed away. Now, I didn't actually interview him, but I listened to all of the oral histories and I read whatever I could about about what he did. And, he single-handedly attacked two, I believe, nests, machine gun nests, and took out all of the German soldiers there, and which allowed his unit to advance up the hill. They were being pinned down by those machine gun nests, and he single-handedly took out two of these nests. And I mean, that's heroism beyond, beyond anything that I can even imagine. I don't know how they did it, and so and then, I've heard stories about the luck that people had. Like, someone told me they got shot in the breastplate area, and they happened to have their cigarette, what do you call it, holder there, and it got dented, but they didn't get killed, but I admire the valor and the valor and the heroism of them, and it's something that I admire, and I think it's something that everybody should know. We should all know. And sometimes I think in this country, because we haven't had to fight a war that involved everyone, we've had our recent wars have been fought by volunteers, and those are small sectors of our country that are severely impacted, but most of us are not, and probably have to go back to the Vietnam War, when they had a draft that everyone was impacted by war, and the sacrifice that you'll be willing to give up for your country. And sometimes I think today we take too much for granted. We take our freedoms for granted. It's what we can get from this country. What can we take from it, rather than appreciating what we have. And I often believe that if most of our lawmakers or many people in business were veterans, and many were, the last generation were veterans, or veterans of World War II. And I think that's why they were able to, unite around major issues, around things that were important for the people and the country, not just your own faction. The value of the country, and maintaining the country. Those values might be lost because no one has had to put their lives on the line, like the members of the 442 and the 100th and all the other units in World War II. And all other veterans, who have fought in wars, not just them, but all veterans who have put their lives on the line for the country.
When your life is on the line, I'm sure that these petty little things that we argue over are just that, are petty. And if we had a little bit more of those values and understanding of sacrifice, how
Right.
would things be different? How has COVID affected you, affected the paper? You were talking earlier about how it's really made an impact, and I think it's making an impact in all of our lives, but how so for the paper?
For the paper, it's one of these catch 22 things. I mean, the news that we provided, the information that we provided was, of utmost importance in the middle of a pandemic, how you protect yourself, the new rules that the mayor or the governor put out, travel restrictions, where the outbreaks are, those kinds of things. So we had an abundance of news, but we ended up having to cut our staff. We were doing rolling furloughs, so we only had a staff of 12, so we had 3 people out every week. So, that's 25% of the staff out every week. And it was 3 different people, so we were juggling, it was a managerial nightmare trying to manage the operation and still keep the stories coming while also, putting out the paper. So it was quite taxing. I have to thank my crew for their dedication and their willingness to put out the time, and understanding that, the work that we do as journalists during this time is really important. These are the times when information is really important. And I always believe that information is power. And I think we're also learning that disinformation also has power. But I also believe, I believe that correct factual information has power, and it also can help people make good decisions, correct decisions. And I firmly believe that. And during a pandemic, there's nothing more important than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took a toll on the bottom line. And it hurt. I believe we put out really good, our coverage for the COVID was as good as you'll find in any news operation in the state. I think we covered angles that almost every news operation covered in the state. Sometimes we were the first to do it. And that's a tribute to the crew, the reporting crew, the small little train that could kind of thing, that I kind of trying to go uphill, the little train that could kind of reporting crew that we had.
Yeah. Well, we're thankful for that. I want to get to some of the questions that have come in. Carlene Chinen, who I know wanted you to talk a little bit more about your aunt's story.
Oh, okay. My aunt's story is really interesting, and I got the Hibakusha grant partly because I said I'd write a book about it, and I've yet to do that. I don't know if I will in my lifetime, but so my aunt actually was born in Paia. She was the eldest child of my grandfather, basically my father's older sister. And because my grandfather was the second child in the family, let me put it this way, the first child in the family, my granduncle, didn't have any children. So they needed somebody to succeed the land. So what happened was my grandfather, who was the second son, had to give up his oldest child to be adopted by the older brother, so that they could succeed. The land would have succession. So she tells a story about how my grandmother, they went and then they all of a sudden disappeared. And it sounded like she was somewhat resentful about that for many years. But my aunt, she made a life for herself, and she actually went to university. She was a university graduate, University of Hiroshima. But on the day of the Hiroshima bombing, my Imada family has a farm in the hills above Hiroshima. It's actually over the hills. So the nuclear bomb didn't destroy their home or anything like that. They were protected. But my auntie had gone to the city because to help create fire breaks. Hiroshima is one of the few cities that wasn't destroyed by firebombing. It might be interesting to note that, hundreds of thousands of people, more people died in firebombings like in Tokyo and Osaka and Nagoya than were killed in Hiroshima by the atomic bomb. The difference is that, there were hundreds of B-29 bombers dropping firebombs on those cities. One plane with one bomb, killed over 100,000 people. And she was creating fire breaks for a potential firebombing attack when the bomb went off. She said she was about 1.5 miles from the hypocenter. She says that she was thrown into a cistern or some kind of water container. She said that there was somebody there with her, but she doesn't know what happened. And the rest of it is kind of a haze. She just sort of wandered around. She didn't offer the kind of detail that some other survivors talk about, people walking around with skin hanging off their arms and legs or be charred or burned. But she remembers reaching some kind of rescue station, and she was found the next day by my I guess uncle and his children. And Yoshiaki, who was her son, went into Hiroshima the day after, and he said, for those people who have been to Hiroshima, he said that they were stand anywhere in Hiroshima, and you could see straight into the ocean, the bay, because there was nothing. Now it's not possible. There are buildings all over the place, but the place had been leveled to the point where you could stand in any part of Hiroshima and you could see into the bay there. And he mentioned that just everything was all hot. It was just really hot. But so that's basically her story. She ended up living to be a ripe old age, close to 100 years old. She just recently passed away, but she did have bouts of cancer, which could be related to the atomic bomb, bombing. And she was a Hibakusha and got regular care. But that's sort of, her story about what happened then.
Thank you for sharing. Rod Sekimoto from California just wrote in to say he's happy to hear that the Maui News still reports on youth sports at a local level. Growing up on Maui and playing youth sports himself, he kept many of the articles from the 1950s playing Little League baseball, and in the 60s playing high school baseball. So every so often he says he reads the articles and it brings him great joy as it takes him back to his childhood. So
I have to say that one of my first assignments was to cover a Little League game, believe it or not. I covered a Little League game at the War Memorial.
Wow. Well, Maui is great with Little League.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lyndon wrote in and wants to know, are the salaries now as competitive as when you began?
No. Basically, our salaries were pretty good. There was the kind of the rise and tide. I've seen the rise and the decline of the paper. I was actually hired during the rise, and that, Matt Thayer and I, and there were some others, a whole bunch of people were hired because of the rise of the paper. When I started, we were a 3-day-a-week paper. And then when I started as an intern, we were a 3-day-a-week paper. No, actually, I think early on when I was full-time, we were 3-day-a-week. We went to 5 days, and then we quickly went to 6 days. So we were a 6-day paper for most of the 80s and 90s. And around 2000, when Ogden bought us, we became a 7-day paper. We're now back to a 6-day-a-week paper. But so, there was this rise and fall. And during the rise, our salaries were very competitive. And like I mentioned, we were able to attract top-notch reporting. I mean, we turned down people with way too much. We were thinking, oh, they were way beyond, their skills were way beyond and experiences were way beyond what would be required for them to, cover stories at the Maui News. And because of that, yeah, we were competitive. But, since 2007, since the Great Recession, we have not, the reporters have not had a raise. In fact, we might have had a retraction in there somewhere. And as a result, I don't think our wages are competitive. There was a time when people used to say here that, Maui Electric was the best place to work at in terms of salary, then Hawaiian Telephone, and then we were third. They would often say we were the third best place to work in terms of salaries, but that's no longer the case. I think our salaries have eroded to the point where, unless you're top scale, it's not livable. Can't make a go of it.
Yeah. Let's see. Joyce Miyamoto wants to know, how do you go about making a cold call interview? That's got to be tough.
Oh, Joyce is my classmate, by the way. I think I mentioned Colleen mentioned in the story that I was a young reporter, and I'm an Asian kid, and you don't just go up and talk to strangers and ask them questions, right? It's disrespectful. So it took me a while to come up with a routine that worked for me, or so that I could just go up to strangers. And the story mentions a story that I regret, and I learned a lot from. I could have interviewed Deidre Collins. It was mentioned in the story. I was at a gathering after their match where I could have gone up and had an interview with her, but I was too shy and I didn't do it. And I beat myself up for it, even to this day. But I think what I ended up coming up with was, it was just the way you look at it. It's like, I'm doing a job, and I'm going up to people because I have to do a job. It's not because I'm shame or and people will tell me, and I've learned through the years that people will shrug you off, or actually sometimes not so politely shrug you off, and sometimes they'll be more than willing to talk, but you don't know until you actually go up to them. And so yeah, I kind of just got into this. I feel like it's and try to do the other things, like, this is important for the story, this is important for our readers, I got that into my head, and then I decided not to take it personally. If somebody said, and I understand why they wouldn't want to talk to me. So if they didn't want to talk to me, I just move on. But yeah, but another interesting thing is I've talked to many people who you think wouldn't talk to you, like victims of victims of. I talked one of the stories I was most proud of was a woman who had been nearly sexually assaulted in a home in Makawao. She ended up fending the guy off, and she had her child in the home, and she told me the story, and it was interesting that she was willing to talk about this horrendous event in her life. And I've also had people talk about their losses. You wouldn't think that people would want to talk about people who had just lost their loved one, but sometimes I found that it's cathartic. Not in all cases, but sometimes you go up to them and you say, I want to do a good story, to do a profile of your loved one who's passed for whatever reason, and sometimes it's cathartic. I found that they thank me after, they would be thankful after the interview. So you never know. But yeah, I did have to develop my own technique to try to go up to people that I didn't know. And the hardest ones were like, we had this thing called a man on the street, where you had a question and you just had to go up to strangers and ask them the question and write down their answer. I hated that. I mean, at least if you're doing a story, if you got a purpose for it, you're asking them story, but just to go on a man on the street was I hated that. So.
Oh. We'll see if Joyce takes this information and starts asking lots of random questions to random people across town. We are gently coming to the end, and I'm so sorry, because I know we still have more questions coming in. Maybe what I'll do is write them down and send them to you, and you can answer that way. But sure. I did want to ask, what do you see as news delivery moving forward? How is news going to be getting out there? I mean, social media. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's sort of the $25,000 question, or whatever, $25 million question. No one really, it's not exactly clear what, looking 20 years down the line, what news is going to be like. I think that the printed editions are going to go away at some point. Most of the people who read our printed editions are probably my age or older, or maybe even older. And that's been a trend. It's been it's a trend. And that's part of our circulation decline. But even myself, I look at the Maui News on my tablet. I look at the digitized edition, not just the stories. I look at the digitized edition, the replica, but I find it easier to read the paper that way than to have a paper in my hand, which might be sacrilegious or abhorrent to some readers out there who say they love the paper. But even I have come to. The other thing is, my wife and I, Deborah, can read the paper at the same time. That's the other good thing, as opposed to passing the sections around like in the old days. It's partly cost. I mean, the cost of running a press is very expensive, and so I'm thinking that it's going to be some kind of online thing, some kind of online. The problem with online is, people think that it should be free, which is a problem, because it costs money to hire reporters and people to produce the product. The other thing is, when you do sell ads on the internet, it's pennies on the dollar. I mean, like an ad in our paper is hundreds and thousands of dollars. Internet ad is tens of dollars. Tens to hundreds of dollars. So there is that problem of how do you fund a newspaper? How do you fund a news organization? The nonprofit model, like Civil Beat, might be an option. Although Civil Beat has Mr. Omidyar, I believe he's eBay, as a backer, so they have that backing. I'm not sure if an organization without that kind of backing would be able to produce a nonprofit, but there are there are models across the country where that is working. So that might be the model of the future, a nonprofit news organization.
Interesting. It'll be, I know everybody on this Zoom call is interested to see how it's going to morph. I'm going to come back to you in just a second with some closing remarks, whatever words of wisdom you want to share with the Zoom world. But again, want to thank everybody for joining us. For those of you who have joined us all year long, we just want to say thank you so much. We appreciate seeing your names on the bottom of the screen every week. We do have one more, an afternoon with the author. This Saturday at 1:30, we're having Pamela Rotner Sakamoto come on to talk about her book, Midnight in Broad Daylight, which is just a very compelling, the true story of the Fukuhara family. And so if you're interested in signing up for that, you can go to our website at nbmc.org and sign up there. But again, thank you so much. Thank you, Lee Imada, for today and for everything that you've done the past 40 years. And we hope that we haven't seen the end of your writing.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of things I think I wanted to conclude with. There are people that know me. I'm a big Star Trek fan, not Star Wars. I enjoy Star Wars, but I'm a big Star Trek person, and I found that I've used some of the philosophies from that show to guide my life. And one of the big ones is that I learned early on that there's a scene in one of the movies where Captain Kirk talks about having to look at the big picture. You don't just look at why you have to go at warp 4. You understand why you go at warp 4. Understand the bigger picture. And it's something that I carried on in my career. That's why I learned not just how to do my own news thing. I learned how the press work, not in depth, but how the press work, how the advertising work, how circulation works. Because I just thought it was important to understand that. And then the other lesson that I wanted to mention is that I'm a big movie fan. And there's a scene from Scent of the Woman Scent of a Woman by I think that's Al Pacino, or is it Robert De Niro? I get them all mixed up. Anyway, at the end, he says that he's walked the crossroad. He's lived life, and he's walked the fork, and he's reached the fork in the road, and he knows which way is the right way, and he knows which way is the wrong way, and the easy way, and he's always taken the easy way. And it always struck me that sometimes the right way, we should always go the right way, even though the right way may be more difficult and may be fraught with, criticism or worse. And but I've always believed that I always ask myself, are you doing the right thing? And doing the right thing hasn't failed me in most cases. So I hope that if I can leave you with that, and thank you for having me on, and for having all the people, listening to this live stream event.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you on behalf of Nisei Veterans Memorial Center, all of our supporters, and the Maui Sons and Daughters of the Nisei Veterans for always being so careful and accurate with the stories that you report about us. And I've written down, understand the bigger picture, and doing the right thing. So thank you so much for those words of wisdom. A hui ho to all of you. Until we meet again, have a great holiday season. Thank you again, Lee Imada, for your time this afternoon. Aloha.